New World Aeternum is a re-release of a 2021 MMORPG, New World. The original New World saw great but very short-term success upon its release in 2021. Just like any failure, many people point to different things with the game, such as the in-game economy. Maybe it was the questing, the skills. Everyone had different ideas to why the game failed. But ultimately, I think there's one word that describes New World back in 2021, and honestly and unfortunately today in 2024, New World Aeternum, and that word is uninteresting. Uninteresting has to be one of the 7 deadly sins of gaming. If your game is uninteresting, there's no hope for your game. If you can't capture your audience, especially in the MMO genre where you have to have an active live player base, your game is done. Your game is done. And once you lose it, it's really, really hard to come back. And I think this re-release and this honestly sort of a rebrand of New World Aeternum was a good idea by Amazon Game Studios ultimately. Because with the announcement of New World Aeternum, fans of the franchise, the people who stuck out and kept with the game, held out hope that this re-release would address the problems that we will discuss with the original game and give it an extra boost to build off of. And I think when you talk about reviving an already released MMO, this is probably the best strategy that Amazon Game Studios could have done. So with the release of New World Aeternum onto PS5, I just had to get my hands on it and jump into the world of New World. So ultimately today I want to take you guys through my experience playing New World Aeternum on my PS5 and just give you my thoughts and the overall, I think, state of the game as it sits right now. Only about a couple months out from release. But before we get to the rest of the video, I'd like to know down in the comments if anyone else in the fall just gets a huge MMO kick. For some reason, once the temperatures start to drop, I just want to jump into a world of an MMO, whether it's old school RuneScape or Albion Online, which I actually love too. I just love a good MMO every now and then. And when I saw this game pop up on the PlayStation Store and just the discourse around it, I was like, I have to do it. And I was thrilled and actually really excited to play this game. All right, so first things first, what do you do the first thing you jump into an MMO? You have to create your character. And this is actually something I really like about New World Aeternum. I think the character creator is actually quite nice, and the options and diversity of the characters that you can make are relatively decent. I think a good character creator lets you make really any character you want. You can either make somebody that looks like yourself, brown hair, dark eyes, whatever, facial features the same as you, build the same as you. Or you can make a wacky looking character that's maybe 4 feet tall, has purple hair, does all this, has a wacky scar or something. And ultimately, I think New World Aeternum does a good job at that. I don't think it's as robust as a lot of the other character creators that I've seen out there. Or even the older character creators like in Skyrim or in Fallout. I don't think it really is very deep, but I do think you can make some pretty cool and unique characters. And I think with an MMO, the character creator is actually really, really important because that's going to become your persona in the game. And in MMO, the whole point of the game is to have social interactions and, be with other people. And what they're going to see is the character that you created and the kind of persona that you're trying to role play to be. That's why it's an MMORPG. And, I think when a game allows you to express yourself and has like a creativity element in it, I think that's when you start to see your game just take off and absolutely print with its success. So I think actually this is probably one of the most important parts of an MMO, is kind of sparking the creativity of your audience. So aside from designing your character and, you know, with the hair's color or style and like build and whatever you want to do, you get to a screen and you're introduced to different types or different classes. In New World Aeternum, there are 7 classes, which they call archetypes. Now, it's important to note, if you choose one archetype in the beginning here, it's only going to affect the 2 weapons that you start the game with. So, for example, if you choose the occultist class or archetype in the beginning of the game, you're going to get an ice gauntlet and a fire staff. However, if you decide to change throughout the game, you can 100% do that. So the game doesn't lock you out to other playstyles after you made that initial choice. I really appreciate when games do this, because I do like to experiment around with different weapons, and I think it'd actually be a huge burden on the player if you started a range build, maybe a range DPS build with Fire Staff, Ice Gauntlet, Cultist, and you decided you want to do Warhammer later, maybe be a tank, and you had to create a whole new character and do a whole new grind, which there is actually some grind, but we'll get to that. You're not locked out to it, and I think that's actually a really good quality of life thing, and just something that actually you can tell that Amazon Game Studios kept the player in mind when that was happening, because it really just locks out content to you if you don't allow people to switch between archetypes. And it's actually fairly common in gaming for that to be the case. So I appreciate Amazon Game Studios for not locking us out of different weapons. So I actually think this is a good thing and definitely a plus on the game. So ultimately, my advice to you is, when you start the game, pick an archetype that you're comfortable with and kind of that mimics your playstyle from other games that you've played. You know, if you want to play more of a tank build and just sponge damage, you might want to do a Warhammer and a Great Axe build. So the Destroyer archetype might be right for you, and that might be keen on your skill set. But if you're more ranged DPS guy like me, maybe a Cultist is for you. And so I think the big takeaway with choosing an archetype is just choose one that you're comfortable with. Just choose something that sounds fun. I don't think any of the 7 archetypes are more broken than the others. There's not one archetype that's like super overpowered compared to everyone else. And if the meta changes in the future, you can always change and start using the weapon that's maybe insanely broken in the future. So with this selection, don't stress too much about it. Just go with your gut in the moment, and I think you'll be just fine. When you choose an archetype, you'll start to level up the weapons within that archetype. So if you choose a Cultist, you will level up Fire Staff and Ice Gauntlet. And as you level up these weapons, you'll start to unlock abilities and passive abilities and things, just more things to make your weapon more powerful. These abilities and passives will directly affect your playstyle and the types of content that you'll do. So once you select an archetype and you start using the weapons within that archetype, you'll start to gain XP for those weapons. As you start to level up your weapon, you'll start to unlock trade skills. And the basic formula is, as you level up your weapon, you gain more abilities to use with that weapon. And there are active and passive abilities that you'll unlock, and generally they'll just make your weapon better, and they'll directly affect the playstyle that you have with that weapon. So this was the caveat that I mentioned earlier. When you pick an archetype and you have the first 2 weapons, you're going to level up those first. But if you want to switch to another weapon, such as Warhammer, if you're an occultist, you're going to have to level up that Warhammer. You're going to have to take that Warhammer from not being any abilities equipped at all to having the necessary abilities equipped that will basically make the Warhammer viable. And, you know, I think that's actually an important part of an MMO, is what kind of person or persona are you going to create for yourself? Are you going to be the Warhammer guy, the Warhammer expert? Or are you going to be maybe a jack of all trades where you have all the weapons upgraded and you can really play any role that you want? And hell, I'm sure that's really viable and really attractive for a lot of people who are running maybe Gorgon raids or something like that. But yeah, it just depends on the kind of play style you want to play, and the way they do it, it really opens up the possibilities for the type of persona you want to create. So as you jump into the actual gameplay of the game, you are actually given I think a pretty good and short tutorial. If any of you have ever played Assassin's Creed 3, you know the tutorial can freaking kill the new player experience. Personally, I hate it when a game makes you go through a super long tutorial. I can't even stand it. Even for super complex games like maybe Hearthstone 4 or Victoria 3, I really don't want to do a tutorial at all. Just let me figure it out. And you know, I think there is something to be said about figuring out a game for yourself. It kind of makes you feel clever. It makes you kind of experience it as you go, which makes it very rewarding when you ultimately do the right things in the game and do figure it out for yourself. Now, with that being said, I do appreciate brief tutorials. They introduce you to the basic controls, basic concepts of the game, and you know, it really helps you not feel just completely overwhelmed when you jump into the game. New World Aeternum does this generally well. The tutorial doesn't feel too much like a tutorial, but it more feels just akin to doing the first quest that you do in a main story. And I really appreciate that they've incorporated the story into the tutorial, and the tutorial is just not a bunch of instructions that you do and steps that you have to follow. I actually like that they try to keep the immersion there, because it makes you feel like you're actually progressing through the game rather than progressing through a tutorial. And the information they give you in the tutorial is very good. They give you a good understanding of the weapons. They give you a good understanding of gathering. They teach you how to cook items and craft items. And this really lets you know what to expect in going forward in the game. And I think that just lets people get their feet wet first before they get exposed to the grand world that's New World Aeternum. So to end the tutorial, you're actually ending on a climax. You are fighting the main boss that was just introduced to you in the cinematics, and the kind of the people that you've talked to along the way to progress to the tutorial. And this will set up the rest of the main story for you, and basically the rest of the game for you, on what to expect with the story and what to expect ultimately with the combat and the game. So by the end of all this, I think you'll actually feel very informed and have a good grip about all the mechanics and what to expect with the game. I think if you feel that way, the tutorial actually did its job. And if you feel actually very curious about what's going to happen with Commander Thorpe, what's going to go on with this story, I think that's actually a great setup for the game, and it actually hooked me right there in that moment to see what everything else in this world is about. So ultimately, I think New World did a great job with this first part of the game. And for the purposes of this video, I'm going to put the tutorial and the character creator all in this one section. I'm just going to say the entry of the game, I think, is an A-. I think it hooks you. I think it gives you the creativity you need in an MMO with the character creator. So I think it was well done, and it got me hooked, and it let me know what to expect with this game, and really to say, is this game for me or is it not for me? And I think that's all you can ask for starting out any game, but especially starting out an MMO. So the gameplay is actually one of the highlights of New World Aeternum. The weapons generally feel crisp. However, just like any game, there are some bumps in the road for the weapons for me. And really the only bump in the road that I can say is that some weapons just feel more balanced, more crisp than others. So for me, I started off with the occultist class in my first run through of New World Aeternum, as I've mentioned earlier. So I was given Fire Staff and Ice Gauntlet. I liked this build at first, but then I traded my Ice Gauntlet because I quickly found a Void Gauntlet and just found that it felt better. And I think that's kind of something that's weird about this game, is just like the feel of the weapons. It's not necessarily bad, but some weapons just don't feel like optimized in some way. It's just kind of like a strange thing for me. And I'm not saying that the Ice Gauntlet is bad or anything, or it's not optimized. I'm just saying it doesn't feel like it is. It kind of feels a little strange to me. and I can't really put to words why. You know, that's not something that I noticed with the Void Gauntlet. Playing with these weapons and playing with the aim and everything is actually going to be important, because unlike other MMOs I've played, New World Aeternum is not a point-and-click game. It actually requires the skill in aiming and shooting projectiles at enemies. And, you know, that actually brings us to quite a big point in the community about, is the aiming broken? Because there is a feature in the game where you can lock onto enemies. Now, there are some in the communities that say this lock-on feature seems to be sort of like an aimbot, because it assists the players in aiming at the enemies. And I can definitely see this, especially as a ranged DPS player. It definitely guides your whole view, which is basically the point of aiming, to the enemy that you're trying to kill. So when it comes to those players and that kind of play style, I definitely agree with this side of the community. I definitely think it's kind of sort of like a pseudo aimbot or aim assist, which for tank or melee players, I don't think it's that big a deal. The big takeaway of the gameplay is as you level up, the game just gets more enjoyable because your weapons and items just start to get better. My two general complaints with the gameplay is the enemies. Throughout the majority of the early to mid game, it feels like almost every enemy has a ton of health, like even the grunts. Thus, fighting them just feels tedious and annoying. Eventually, you get to a point where there's really just no thrill in fighting the enemies, because they all have a very predictable and boring movement and do not really pose any threat to you as a player. When I played through my first playthrough, I died twice through the main story, and once was because I fell off the map. And my other death was I jumped into an area during the octopus or tentacle fight boss where I didn't know it'd insta-kill you. The enemies are way too easy. After a while, you just feel no sense of achievement in defeating the enemies, and that's a shame, because I feel like with the generally good combat mechanics, this could be a highlight of New World and really give it that X factor. And, you know, that kills me to say, because it just started off so well, you know? And I really hate to give it a negative critique, because it does seem like they've worked on it, but it just seems like they fumbled the opportunity. And overall, I just think the gameplay's it's fun, but it's just disappointing after a while and just gets bland. And I just think it falls well short of being stellar. Overall, the gameplay is good, and the combat mechanics are really great and have the potential to do something really interesting. However, I just don't think with the enemy engagement, the gameplay really steps up to be stellar, something like a Black Myth Wukong or like a critically acclaimed combat game. So for this category, I give the gameplay a B-. So our next category is the graphics. I think the graphics in New World Aeternum are great. I think the world looks great, and I think the environment is actually pretty impressive for an MMORPG. Now, I don't know about you guys, but most of the MMOs I've played could probably pass as a mobile game. I mean, old school RuneScape, Albion Online, they really aren't, I would say, critically acclaimed graphic games. And even WoW, to a certain extent, it kind of has its own art style that it goes through. And that's completely fine. I think even old school RuneScape, it kind of has a vibe that sets itself up differently than everyone else, and kind of has a charming vibe after a while because the game is just inherently fun. And to me, New World gives like off its own kind of vibe, and it does a good job giving off the vibe that we're in the new world. We're in a mysterious place that's kind of undiscovered, and all these little things are happening throughout that we got to figure out. There's magical areas, there's magical factions, there's interesting people, enemies, dark areas, light areas, towns. I think they do a good job with the environment, and I just think the game overall looks great. I love the artwork in between every little like loading screen and cutscene. I think it's really well done, and I think some of the animated cutscenes are actually really well done, and definitely a lot of talent went behind that. So I actually think the artwork is great, and I'd give it a B+. So our next category is the progression. Ultimately, the progression is where I start to have problems with the game. From a very general level, I just do not like the progression system in New World Aeternum. Now, the progression system is broken up into various different quadrants, I'd say. There are skilling, there's combat experience, and then there's an overall level that you'll get, which has a max level of 65. And once you reach max level, that stuff that's opened up to you is just going to be more difficult. And then because it's more difficult, you should get more rewards and better rewards. And this is just the general flow of how an MMO works, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. However, the problems with the progression for me start to come in when you start to talk about other skills and just like the overall experience of progressing your character. And I think if New World was completely focused on just being a combat MMO and didn't have any of the other skills that I mentioned earlier, such as harvesting, mining, gathering, anything like that, I think my review for this section would be different. However, with everything together, it just all feels just not right. It just feels broken. And I think it really all comes from one skill in particular. The most frustrating skill for me in this game is mining. Mining takes a really long time for you to rank up, and it's really necessary for a lot of the other skills that you'll need to also rank up. The problem I found with mining when I was playing is there was a lot of new players because the game had just released. So we were all kind of at that low level. And just in line with most MMOs I've played, we're all going for those low level resources. And in this case, I was looking for a lot of iron. And the main problem I ran into was I had to fight other players to get to those ore spawns. I was fighting players to get the most common ore in the game. And this was reflected in the market when iron was starting to become more expensive to buy than a lot of the ores that were leveled above it, like star metal. And this will segue into my problems with the economy later. But for now, it does break the leveling system for the other items that you need to craft. Specifically, if you want to start crafting weapons or armor and stuff and level up that skill, it's going to be super expensive and kind of brutal for the low level player to do that. Additionally, the only reason you're crafting those items is so you could level up the crafting skill so you can get max level in that crafting skill, and then at that point craft something that's actually valuable. Everything up until that point, it's completely worthless. And kind of to add insult to injury, once you get to that max level, so you climb all the way up the mountain, the horizon's awful. There's nothing to do once you get to max level. It's kind of like if you climbed Mount Everest and you saw a Target parking lot and not a beautiful horizon. It's just doesn't feel very rewarding in the end. But it also doesn't feel very rewarding through the thick of it, through the middle, because you're crafting a bunch of stuff that's completely worthless because there's no need for mid-tier items at all. And you just craft, salvage, over and over and over. And that just gets old, boring, and completely useless. You can't even make money off of it. And actually, this is something that's different than a lot of MMOs I've played, because a lot of times you have a market for the low tier items because, people want to experiment with different builds or want to buy different weapons, or there's something like that. And I think there's some of that in this game, but there's really not a lot because of how much you do and how much you get through the main story and just like questing and doing small things throughout the game and with the factions as well. Really simply put, if the system is going to give you that items just by inherently playing the game, then there's no need for the player base to craft those items and put it into the in-game economy. And if there's no need for those items in the in-game economy, then there's really no need inherently for you to do that skill, to do the crafting, other than leveling up that crafting. But then once you level up that crafting to the max level, it's very underwhelming because you've climbed this mountain and it just feels like completely unsatisfying at the end. So it's kind of a logical quandary here. We have this logical loop where basically you're just doing crafting for no reason. It's like you're just doing it because it's clockwork, I don't know about you guys, but I don't play video games to do clockwork. I work a 9 to 5 to do that. And this is actually what I think a lot of video game companies miss out on, is sometimes these MMOs just have a crafting skill that's just completely grindy and doesn't take actually any skill of like becoming better at being a crafter. And like, if we're gonna get fully immersed in this world, shouldn't like the best blacksmiths have some sort of skill that makes them the best blacksmith? Or the best weaver has a skill that makes them the best weaver? So really, just to put a bow on this section and not really get too in the weeds about the progression system, I just don't think it's really well done. I think it's very underwhelming overall. And I think you get to the max level just too quickly, and you get the items that you need to be at the top too quickly. And really what I'm getting at is, I think one day I'd like to see an MMO that takes this to the next level and makes the skills actually skill based, and they have little mini games that make an item better depending on how you do in the mini game. Or there's more expendable items in the game, the in-game economy would actually do a lot better. But because of that, and because of the ridiculous gold cap, I just don't think that this is a healthy economy, nor one that really wants you to push to grind that skill, to grind that crafting skill, or to grind to max level, which honestly is pretty easy, but to grind all these skills up to max level. You know, and just to share a little bit about myself to you guys is I actually have a degree in economics. I studied economics at university. So when I played this game, it really just gives me insane levels of cringe because I just can't believe that they managed the game in this way. Really, just to be frank with you guys, I think the gold cap is one of the stupidest things I've ever seen in an MMO. The more hours I spent in New World Aeternum, I've started to understand why this game has been plagued with economic problems throughout its lifetime, and ultimately why the first iteration of this game failed because of its economic issues. Really, to sum up the game is like, at a certain point, the game just tells you to stop playing. You'll reach max gold, you'll reach max level, you'll reach max skill, max weapon skill, max Aetherzoth, max storage. There's no reason to keep grinding. It tells you to stop playing. It tells you that your adventure in the world of Aeternum is over. To me, when a game tells me to stop playing, I'll, acquiesce to it. I'll stop playing. And that just really is unfortunate to me because I just think this game has so much potential, and it just hurts for me to have to give it a bad review. Unfortunately, with the progression, which I think is the most important part of MMOs, I have to give this game a D+. I think it's awful. I just think the economy is just abysmally run, and it's structured to give the late game activities, no viability at all. And I think if there's nothing to grind for in an MMO, and there's nothing to look forward to in playing but a couple raids at the end, I just don't think the game's really worth the grind. I just think it ruins the game. So the last word on this game is that New World Aeternum is just a tremendous disappointment. The game has so much potential, and I just think it could be a slam dunk hit. But with the economy management just being tremendously broken, and all the skills just being tedious and not necessary at all, I just think there's a reason why this game and its community have a lot of pessimism surrounding the developers and the support of this game. I just don't really have optimism that this game can survive this re-release, and that it will be a game that people are playing in well into the future because of the restrictions the game has in its late game. I hold out hope that the developers will address some of these issues, and I think with the timeline that they released, there is some hope, especially among the fan base, that they will address a lot of the issues that I mentioned in this video, especially with the economy and maybe how they grind some of the skills. But a lot of the issues that I mentioned are core issues with the game, and I just have a lot of pessimism that will ever change. Just see the potential in this game, and I don't want this game to fail. I actually want it to succeed, and I hope with this constructive feedback it can succeed. But as far as playing the game right now, I just don't think this is something I can get into in the near future. So that's my thoughts on New World Aeternum. I had a great time playing it, and let me know what you guys think. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Like if you agree, dislike if you dislike. Subscribe down below and follow me on Twitter, where I hope to be posting more content both on YouTube and Twitter, and hope to just keep you guys updated to everything I'm thinking about and all things gaming. So thank you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.